everyone, good afternoon. Hope we're all still awake in these very hot rooms. So this afternoon I'm going to talk about a project I've been working on for the last 18 months, which is a collaboration between myself at Goldsmiths University and Arts Council England. Before I introduce myself, I thought it's probably useful just to give you a little bit of a context into the organisation that I've been working with. So who is Arts Council England? Arts Council England is an arm's length body of the UK government. They have about 700 staff across 9 offices, and they invest public money from the government and the National Lottery to support arts and cultural sector. So they fund big buildings and individual artists. But in total, they spend about £639 million per year across England. So a relatively sizable amount of money that they manage for their investment portfolio. Their work is guided by their 10-year strategy, which is called Let's Create. And it seeks to ensure that everyone in England has access to high-quality cultural experiences in the places where they live and work, and that the creativity of all individuals is valued and nurtured. So, mid-size organisation, mid-size amount of money, public sector, certain amount of responsibility, and then we also have arts and culture as the context in which they're operating. So about 2 years ago, Arts Council England decided they should do something on AI, and they started to speak to me. What they wanted was for me to solve AI for the cultural sector. And rather than doing that, I said, well, what about I slow you down for 18 months, and then we can come back to that question. Because they wanted to provide sector support and sector development around the use of AI technologies in creative practice and cultural management. But they hadn't solved this themselves. So I said, well, how can you advise the sector on what to do if you don't have your own governance structures in place? So we set about developing a research and development programme that would help them to develop their own internal governance structures. But this was also seen as a learning and development mechanism for an organisation whose responsibility is around sector development for organisations across the country. We were able to do this through quite a novel mechanism called BRAID. BRAID stands for Bridging Responsible AI Divides, and it's a programme that's funded by the UK Research Councils. It seeks to put arts and humanities researchers into diverse organisations at the early adoption of novel technologies. So there's about 17 of us, and we've been chucked into organisations that were never going to pay for a responsible AI research fellow. So they got me for free, which was really, really useful, one for them because it was free, but also for me in terms of my ability to deliver. So I was, on the one hand, essentially on secondment, but on the other hand, I was external when needed. So positionality became really important for this project because I had operational access, but I also had critical independence. So I wasn't a consultant. I wasn't there to solve their problems, but I was a free, nice to have additional resource. And this provided me with deep institutional engagement, but it also allowed me to preserve the autonomy needed to offer constructive critique. And one of the most useful mechanisms in this interesting relationship was we had an external funding agreement. So Arts Council England is a funder. They give people funding agreements. Tables were flipped. So when I needed to do something that the organisation wasn't happy with or was moving a bit too slow with, I was able to remind them that if we didn't do it, they were going to be in breach of their funding agreement. And that was a language that they understood. So actually having this external funding arrangement created this fixed delivery time frame, and it encouraged risk-taking, but it also created credibility. I'm not a public sector employee, and that meant I could take more risks, but it also meant I could speak publicly about these challenging topics that are controversial within the sector in a way that staff members can't. So that's kind of the interesting, novel, weird position I find myself in. So yeah, when it's useful, I'm on secondment and I'm Arts Council England, but also when it's useful, I kind of work with them, but I'm an academic at Goldsmiths University. And that's been a really good position to get stuff done, both internally and externally. Okay, so what do we do? I went in and I did a really big study internally. I asked staff, how are you using AI? Everyone said, well, we don't think people are really using it. The survey said otherwise. And the data gathered from the staff survey got exec board interested quickly, because this data is from about 2 years ago now. But what it showed was a significant amount of staff were already using generative AI platforms in their everyday work. But they were doing it in a completely unregulated way because, well, why wouldn't they? No one had told them otherwise. So this was very much a research-led exercise. We didn't go, you need a policy. Instead, I went in and said, what do you need? And we were led by the data. So we did some quantitative research and some qualitative research to identify need. The data was clear, it evidenced the need for policy. And we framed that from the qualitative data around 2 areas. 1, legal compliance, and 2, reputational risk. But we also started to think about how would an AI policy sit within a wider AI strategy for the organization. So again, remembering they didn't want me to do any of this. They brought me in to do something, and I said, well, I don't want to do that, I want to do this. So we decided, right, let's create a strategy so we have a roadmap of where we're going. So the strategy has 3 angles. The first, it seeks to address how Arts Council England uses AI responsibly for internal purposes. The second, how Arts Council England can help the sector navigate the opportunities and challenges of AI. And the final one, how Arts Council England can contribute to UK AI policy development. So here we can see this real ecosystem. Arts Council England is a development body, but it also needs to evolve and develop itself. And this is really our roadmap of how we set out to do it. Everything I'm talking about today is in a full report, which I'll link to at the end. So I'm going to skip across bits. For the purpose of today, I'm just going to pick out 3 distinct areas of the development process that we engaged with. The first is we established a governance structure to drive AI policy development. We established an AI oversight group, which was chaired by an exec director and made up of directors in relevant business functions, for example, data governance. They were kind of our pre-exec board group. Then we set up the Responsible AI Reference Group, which we started calling the working group because that was a really long title. It was chaired by me and representatives across the organisation. But crucially, that group was made up to represent the sentiment that we witnessed to AI in the staff survey. So we had the representative amount of people that hated AI and thought the organisation should not touch it. We had a representative amount of middle people, and with a representative amount of people that thought AI was great and it would mean they didn't have to do boring work. And so the people that hate AI did not want to be in this group. So we had to do a lot of lobbying to convince them, you need to be in this group so you can shape the policy that you want. And my aim with them was, at the end of this, I want you to tell me why you hate AI with conviction, because currently you're just telling me it's bad. So this group, and none of this work was about selling AI, but it was about upskilling. We also engaged very early with the staff union, because they were like, who's this weird AI girl? Are there job cuts coming? So when I went to the union and said, if I can teach you how to resist as much as I can teach you how to use these technologies, job done. Again, I'm external, I'm free, you're not paying for me. Really got the staff on board. Okay, so from there, we developed an internal AI policy for staff use. The policy, completely drawn from what staff wanted in the staff policy. We did an initial draft, and we brought it to our working group, and we said, this is rubbish. Well, I said, this is rubbish. I don't know what you all do. So pick it apart and make it better. And from there, we had really, really interesting cross-cutting conversations about different areas of business function. I think overall, we had about 30 different members of staff comment on the policy. And the rule was, you can't complain, you can only add. So the rule was, you can't say, I don't like this line. You have to tell me how to make it better. And so what this meant was, when we produced the final policy, all of these staff members' names were on it. So we saw them as being important stakeholders and representative voice across the organisation. We also didn't start from scratch. Lots of this is not AI, it's just common sense. It's alignment, new technology, the alignment things. Corporate values, the Nolan principles of public life, don't cheat, don't steal. These are already public sector things. We just aligned them with this technology. We also then developed an external public statement. So big function, you've got £600 million to manage. People write grant applications to get that money. You assess the grant applications to give that money. Should Arts Council use AI to assess funding applications? Well, legally they can, technically they can, but should they? It's a values question. There's no right or wrong answer. So through consultation, it was decided, no, we are art form experts. That's the bit of the job we love. So they put a statement out and said, we are not going to use AI to make any assessment decisions. We might do it in the background to do some stuff around like addresses and phone numbers, but in terms of art form, no, not at this time. And if we decide we're going to in the future, we'll tell you. But the statement also says, however, applicants can use generative AI to write their applications, in brackets silently, because we can't stop you. But here's some guidance and things to think about. This was really important because people that weren't getting money were kicking off and complaining and saying, nobody even read my application, it was AI. But we'd nothing on the website to say it wasn't. So this is now a public-facing statement that provides transparency of process. Okay, so that is a very whistle-stop tour of the internal responsible AI work that we have done. There's a full document, the full report, which talks from how I arrived at Arts Council and created chaos, right through to how we developed this internal governance structure. There's a QR code, but if you also just type in AI Arts Council England, you'll get this. I'm seeing some people holding phones. Yes, good. Okay, I'm going to go on, but if people need links, come find me at the tea break. How am I doing in time? Good? Oh, I'm good. Okay, I'm going fast. Okay, cool. So, sector development organisation, this was a learning process. After we did this internal governance work, we produced a report that outlined the process that was taken, the research and development process, the participation mechanisms that we used. But we also then developed a toolkit for the sector. So here you can see a step-by-step, 7-part series of worksheets that are designed for organisations with 1 people or 1,000 people to develop their own AI governance conversation and their own AI, responsible AI policy. If you're a small organisation, you can probably complete these worksheets in an hour. If you're a big organisation, you could probably spend a year on this. But these are the real intro frameworks to empowering people to have these conversations. And most of the conversations are about values. They're not about technical knowledge. And what's great about these is we've seen organisations as diverse as the Wildlife Trusts in England are using this toolkit quite widely. Theatres in Liverpool, the Royal Academy in London is using this toolkit. The appeal has been it's not technical. It comes from a social technical lens. It's a values positioning document. Because when it comes to generative AI at a 101 level, it's about values and decision making. Once you start to think about values, you can then start moving further to think about assurance. But if you're an organisation of less than 5 people, you're not going to get the assurance unless you've got the values. And so those smaller organisations are probably the ones at the most legal and reputational risk because their staff are throwing everything into ChatGPT and haven't had any consideration or training on why that might be problematic. Okay, so some kind of top-level reflections on this project. Throughout all of this work, we've emphasised consultation and reflection. And this has enabled us to develop an informed understanding and evidence base for our work on AI. It's values-based boundary setting. The staff placed the red lines. It was the staff themselves that said, we don't want to use AI in grant assessment. And that's really interesting because there are other peer organisations in the UK who are exploring using AI in decision-making for small grants. So they've kind of put a red line and said, no, this is what we do. We sought to drive learning and development through applied action research. So we offered staff the opportunity to learn new skills and apply their existing knowledge to the application of new technologies. We worked across the organisation and in so doing have built a solid foundation. Across the AI project team, oversight group, staff reference group, pilot projects, we've engaged around 45 staff in direct delivery or consultation. We've also engaged probably 500 staff through in-person drop-ins and webinars that explain different policy announcements. Transparency as government has been core to this work. The public statement strengthened sector trust, clarified expectations, and enabled dialogue about future policy evolution. I think a really important thing for me, as we've learned throughout this work, there are no right answers. Instead, we've realised that we need to be able to stand over our working out and justify the positions we have taken as an organisation. There is no time to wait for a definitive answer. AI is already here and it's already being used. Rather than waiting to become experts, we are instead seeking to develop an ongoing conversation, learning from peers, from staff, and those that we serve in the creative and cultural sector. Which means I can now start the task the Arts Council wanted me to do 18 months ago. So we have just, in the last 2 weeks, published a new report which looks at AI technologies and emerging practice, and emerging forms of creative practice. So I'd really encourage you to go and look at this report. It moves the dial from AI is bad for arts, and instead refocuses the argument to look at how artists can make AI better for society. So this report maps £4 million of investment the Arts Council England has put into artists using AI technologies over the last 5 years. And what it shows us is that artists are engaging with these technologies in ways that make the technology better and more robust for society. So whether that's examples around developing chatbots with marginalised women in terms of voice recognition technology, or if that's developing new choreography software that allows rural schools to be able to develop immersive technology experiences through the teacher's smartphone. These are not lazy artists making AI slop. These are artists who are making society and technology better by being critical about what we want these technologies to do. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at our new report. And also, now that we've moved beyond sorting out the Arts Council when it comes to AI, in the next couple of months, we're going to be announcing a new sector-facing project that will very much seek to establish responsible AI and cultural leadership. Because we know artists are doing great things, and what we want to do is to empower them so that we have more artists on TV, more artists doing op-eds, and less Elon Musk talking about what these technologies mean. So that's our next bit, investing more in creative practitioners, but also sector development and artistic development to encourage people to become instigators of change when it comes to responsible AI in society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Octavia, and thank you everyone for staying with us this time of the day. Well, my name is Jamila Venturini. I'm co-executive director at Derechos Digitales, which is a human rights organization that works at the intersection with rights and technology at the Latin American level. I guess it's important to mention that we have been developing since 2019 research about AI deployment in different Latin American countries. We have a project called AI and Inclusion, in which we analyze already 10 case studies about AI deployment by the public sector in different Latin American countries. We have also developed research about participatory processes within AI policymaking. This is one recent one that I will share with you. It's a small case study about Brazilian process. It's a incomplete case study about Brazilian process, and I'll share more about that in 1 minute. But we have also analyzed how the countries discussing their AI strategies have implemented participation policies. I guess one important insight from the case studies that we have been analyzing into now is that we have serious challenges on transparency, particularly on how people that might be affected by these systems are aware of their existence, their implementation, their mechanisms for redress, the possibility of consenting or not to the use of their data within these processes, etc. So from this experience and these backgrounds, and we have several findings that you can find at the website that is mentioned in the slide. From this understanding, we started to analyze a bit more and try to experiment, going a bit deeper in analyzing how participatory processes occur in the Brazilian case. A bit of context in the Brazilian case, and I saw from the program that we had several interventions and case studies from Brazil. Brazil has a large trajectory of participatory processes, both offline and online. And since the first decade of this century, we have been experimenting with online consultations and other processes. It's a large tradition of adopting such type of processes. Going to the AI bill that we analyze in this paper, Brazil, as different countries in Latin America, started to discuss AI strategies around 2017, 2018. There were some limited instances of consultation for those processes that we analyze in another paper. But by 2021, there were several draft bills pointing out to principle-based AI regulation in Brazil. Those bills represented a huge risk of authorizing abusive uses of AI without no safeguards. So they were basically drafted in a way in which you would have measures to incentivize the adoption of AI and very generic measures and very generic principles around ethical use, etc. So there was an important mobilization by civil society when one of those bills were advancing in Congress, calling for a broader discussion around the topic. We know the EU AI Act took several years of discussions until it was drafted. We were about to approve a legislation with, one of them was less than 10 articles in less than 1 year. So there was a strong call from Brazilian civil society on more participation and a broader discussion that would lead to a proper AI regulation framework. That resulted in the creation of a commission, an expert commission within the Senate. That's the small name of this commission. That started operating in 2022. Here you have precise information about how that worked and the consultation process that was developed. Some interesting points of this commission have to do with the fact that you had experts supporting the drafting of a new AI bill. That is the one that's continued to be discussed until today. And you have the processes of consultation. The other interesting thing, before we get into the precise data that Juan Manuel will share with us, is that we had again reaction from civil society, and Brazilian civil society is very active, very strong, very organized. We had again reaction from civil society questioning the fact that the expert commission was only with experts from law, with a law background, and the fact that you didn't have any racial diversity or representation within the commission. So the commission, hearing these types of demands, opens new forms of participation in a set of public hearings, trying to expand participation and diversity of participation. And the point I mentioned in the beginning about one of our findings within the case studies connects to this, because we know that the type of systems that are being deployed by the state, although this is much broader than state deployment of AI, but the type of systems that are being deployed that basically targeting vulnerable communities, historically marginalized communities that were not engaged necessarily in this expert commission. And the question we had at the beginning was, to which extent were they somehow represented implemented or participating in these processes more directly. I guess now we could go a bit further into looking to the results that we find in the research. Now let's want Manuel to continue.
Thank you, Jamila. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to mention something regarding the methodology, this paper was published in the Internet and Sociedade journal, that is a journal from Brazil, by the organization Internet Lab. So it was very interesting collaborating with them in the process. It's an open journal that I invite you also to read. And all the information that I am going to present, really the data and the information that Jamila mentioned, but specifically the data regarding the numbers on the participatory process, are based in the information published by the Senate in their official website. They published every session, all the data, even the presentations are available in the website of the Senate and of the Deputy Chamber of the Brazilian Congress. So all this information is based in the systematization of open available data. So the most interesting thing is the Sejubia, the name of the commission, as Jamila mentioned, have published a final report where they mention the numbers on the public hearings, and they say that they try to gain diversity, to ensure multi-sector diversity, and to include speakers with multiple gender and racial identities. This was one of the questions that we tried to discuss, to analyze, to try to see if they effectively have implemented this kind of measures to guarantee this diversity. Yes, please.
And that particular claim, we can say that it was somehow quickly answered because we lacked information about gender and race within the data that was available. So this is one initial point regarding the type of information about participation that was available. Different Brazilian entities are used to publishing social demographic data around different processes. In this particular case, that information wasn't present. So we couldn't actually test if that particular claim was complied unless with a proxy, let's say. And
actually, Derechos Digitales participated in this participatory process. Jamila participated from the organization. So it's a process that we followed closely. As you can see, this is a broader approach to the participation sector, overall participation totals. As you can see, the private sector is the sector that has the most quantity of participants within all the processes. As you can see, thank you. The three spaces are the written submissions, the public hearings, and the international seminar that was some kind of public hearing, but with internationals, not people from Brazil. And within the written submissions, that is the only remote or the space where people could write things and send them, maybe have space to consensual approaches and to written, and this kind of written pieces could pass for different test and overview processes. The private sector showed the most proactivity in this part of the process. And there were limited participation from grassroots SEO and affected communities. That was one of the things that we were interested in analyzing. Within the public hearings and the seminar, there were high presence of academia. Brazil has a really interesting framework, a network of academia institutions that work in this agenda. And they invited many members of this sector, of this network of academic institutions. And civil society was present, but was really underrepresented compared to the other sectors. And we detected that there are structural asymmetries in this process, and because there were unequal access to resources and technical capacity is not the resources that CSO have are very different than the resources that could have the different economic sectors. This could be the companies or the associations that gather the different companies in civil society, more likely organizations. So this table represents the things that we are saying. This is available in the paper. That is available in the website of PERS. We have already sent it. There were also disparities within the origin of the people who participated. This is only based on the Brazilians who participated in the process. The big cities from Brazil were the most represented in the hearings, but there weren't many people from distant cities or maybe places where there are not universities that work with these things. So to close and to sum up, if participation is made to ensure democracy legitimacy and to try to achieve the goal that the Commission had, design of this kind of participatory process matters. So we wanted to suggest some improvements that we made for future processes. For example, proactive outreach to underrepresented regions and sectors. That is one thing that was absent in this approach, in this process. Financial and logistical support for civil society participation, and clear transparency mechanisms, because it's not clear how submissions were incorporated within the process. This is something that we saw also in other participatory processes that we analyzed in Derechos Digitales. It's not clear why certain proposals were accepted or rejected, and it's necessary to publish all the information regarding the process in a structured, open, and disaggregated manner, because it was a lot of work to try to systematize the information that they had published. So this is it. Here you can find us and contact us. Thank you very much.
Okay, we can get started now. Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to be here today. So I'm the final presentation of the day. So thank you so much for sticking around. So my name is Faidat Abdullahi. I'm a policy advisor at the Africa Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm also an independent researcher and my research focus is on the governance of emerging technologies and how it can contribute to development goals in the global south, particularly in Africa. So my topic today is on the rethinking participatory AI governance under digital inequity. So participatory AI governance is often framed as a democratic process, but participation requires access, and in context of digital inequity, that access collapses, and that requires different mechanisms. So that's what my presentation would focus on. So just some background, Africa's AI governance landscape is rapidly evolving. McKinsey research says that AI has the potential to contribute billions of dollars to Africa's economy by 2030. And African countries are taking note of that. As of 2025, over 15 African countries have developed AI strategies. And there's an emphasis on ensuring stakeholder engagement and consultation in development of AI strategies and policies, particularly from civil society organizations. However, the reality of digital inequity is that 64% of Africans lack internet access. And this is made worse by data costing 5% in Africa when compared with the global north. Low internet penetration also means that there's a wider gap between urban and rural communities, and rural communities are even more marginalized. So the problem here is that many AI governance processes rely on digital mechanisms. There is an assumption that citizens can participate digitally through online portals, which is used a lot, virtual consultations, and web-based feedback platforms. But what happens when millions of people cannot connect? When baseline digital access is uneven, participatory legitimacy cannot be assumed. So the question here is, how do we evaluate participation differently under these conditions? So to address these questions, I adapt Akon Fong's Democracy Cube. It's a widely used framework in participatory governance. So I chose the Democracy Cube because it allows us to examine participation across 3 dimensions. Who can participate, how can they participate, and what power do they have? So my adaptation integrates digital inclusion indicators into each dimension of the cube. To ask not just who can participate or how can they participate, but who has access to the required infrastructure and connectivity to participate, and who can participate given the digital literacy and language barriers. So for each dimension, I construct a scale ranging from least inclusive to the most inclusive based on whether and how digital barriers are accessed. On the least inclusive end, participation might be limited to expert-only consultations, digital online portals, or one-off feedback mechanisms. And on the other end, participation could be more inclusive with offline engagement, which is very critical, multilingual access, trusted intermediaries, and the visible influence of digitally marginalized communities on the outcomes. So to apply this skill, I examined the selected AI governance strategies using guiding questions to determine where they fall on the scale. Questions such as, are infrastructure gaps acknowledged and addressed? Do consultations go beyond digital mechanisms? And is digital literacy addressed in the governance process? So to illustrate how this framework could be used, I used 3 cases: Nigeria's National Artificial Intelligence Strategy, Kenya's Artificial Intelligence Strategy 2025 to 2030, and the AU Continental Artificial Intelligence Strategy. So the first dimension assesses participant selection, so that is who can actually access governance processes given the infrastructure, device, and affordability barriers. So across the 3 cases for participant selection, there was a range in where the countries or the cases fell on the scale. The AU takes a more expert-only approach, relying heavily on specialized task forces and institutional experts, and Kenya has a more targeted outreach approach. So there was an inclusion of local communities and digitally marginalized groups. And although the AU and Nigeria acknowledge that there is an AI divide and infrastructure issues can limit the ability of citizens to participate in AI, the process of developing the AI strategy was primarily done with digital methods. So their process were inclined towards those who were already within the digital ecosystem. For Nigeria, for example, it was conducted by over 120 internal and external experts. Which would exclude the 55% of the population who are offline. Kenya took a somewhat different approach. They hosted town halls in 17 counties, which could support the inclusion of those who are offline, which is about 65% of Kenya's population. Although these sessions were still in areas that considered tech or innovation hubs, so it could still have been a population of primarily tech-savvy individuals. The second dimension examines communication and decision. So how can digital excluded individuals actually participate? What formats, languages, and mechanisms? So in terms of communication, the strategies showed a varied approach. So I would say Kenya and Nigeria were more mixed methods, and the African Union used primarily digital-only platforms. So for Nigeria utilized an in-person workshop, and then followed with an online portal for public review. And that's where I would say the problem here was. There were no primary offline mechanisms for the public to participate, and it was also primarily conducted in English. And for a country like Nigeria, where I'm from actually, that has over 500 languages, that is missing a key multilingual approach. And the African Union as well also relied on English language, even though there are several official languages. And there was involvement of institutional intermediaries, but no offline mechanisms were available to the public. I would say in the strategies, Kenya demonstrated a stronger commitment to linguistic and physical accessibility by prioritizing Swahili first AI models and their offline town halls. But of course, not everyone in Kenya speaks Swahili as well. So it would be great to have, more inclusion of even more languages. But for the development of the strategy itself, it was also primarily conducted in English. The third dimension examines authority and power. So this is what influence can they actually have in the outcome of the consultation. So the key findings here reflected, I would say, Kenya had a slightly more unique input. So it was clear that there was input from the regional in-person town halls that they did. So that they included as guiding strategies, the strategies had guiding principles that included the preservation of indigenous knowledge and languages. And for Nigeria's process, although they had a public feedback portal, again, this was primarily online, so there's no evidence that the primarily, say 55% of the population are offline, had any influence in the process. It was more consultative for people who were already within the digital ecosystem. For the African Union strategy, there was they invoked communal principles in the strategy itself, but when it comes to power and influence, it still primarily starts with the AI Executive Council. There were no clear mechanisms to track input from any of the marginalized communities, digitally marginalized communities. So I would say the summary for the findings was across all three of them, digital infrastructure is identified and framed in the strategies as an AI development prerequisite, but not as an AI governance prerequisite. So there's an acknowledgement that citizens cannot have meaningful power in an AI-driven future, but their voices were not sufficiently included in the creation of the AI governance strategies. So the core implication here is that when we do not have the full consideration of digital excluded individuals, the risk here is that as we're advancing AI development and even other advanced technologies, we risk widening the digital divide. And when large portions of the population lack connectivity, that the participatory legitimacy cannot depend on digital platforms alone. For us to have true participation, we have to ensure that governance processes intentionally design offline mechanisms and also use intermediary organizations to ensure that the voices of digitally excluded populations are sufficiently included. So some key recommendations, just to close. For policymakers that are developing AI strategies, I would say it's a necessity in contexts like this. Like I said earlier, 64% of the population do not have access to the internet. It's a necessity to embed offline and intermediary mechanisms alongside digital platforms. But it should not be an afterthought, but a part of the actual core design. And I would say, even though it wasn't perfect, Kenya's offline town halls is an example of how that could be done across 17 counties. It is also important that we clearly demonstrate how marginalized communities include those that are excluded. How marginalized communities, including those excluded from digital connectivity, are shaping the policy drafts and the outcomes. So showing that they actually had influence, not just that there was, input and consultation from them, but reflecting clearly how that impacted the outcome. So I would say future research on this topic could examine how social, cultural, and linguistic diversity can shape what is feasible. So for example, like I mentioned earlier, Kenya has Swahili as a national language, even though there are other languages. Swahili is a one of the national languages. For Nigeria, there's over 500 languages, but the official language is English. So what that means is that we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach across all countries, even when we talk about the continent of Africa. Of course, there are 54 countries. So we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Solutions cannot be identical everywhere. So we need to research on how different linguistic and socio-economic landscapes can influence what participatory mechanisms are possible and effective. So another research point would be on the features of participatory design that can actually enable visible influence on outcomes. So, ensuring that we actually have a transfer of power. We're not just collecting inputs, particularly under conditions of digital inequity. So thank you so much for listening. I'm open to any questions.